Hello, welcome to everybody. It's June the 11th. It's noon, and it is How to Win the Writing Game. We've been away for a little while. We are delighted to be back today with a bullet. We are back with the wonderful Alex Michaelides, who I am sure many people reading this read his first book, The Silent Patient. More about that in a moment. But we're here today to celebrate everything he's achieved so far, and also the launch yesterday of his second novel, The Maidens. So just a little bit of background. Alex was born in Cyprus in 1977. He moved at the age of 18 to the UK to study English. And then he went off to Los Angeles to study screenwriting at the American Film Institute. And he has had a lot of success in that world. He wrote the film Devil You Know, starring Ros Pike, and co-wrote The Con Is On, starring Uma Thurman and Tim Roth. It says in his CV, and I'm sure we're going to pick up on this later on, that he was disillusioned with screenwriting, moved back to the UK, and then took a job at a therapeutic community for teenagers in North London and studied psychotherapy. Then he decided to, as it says, take one last throw of the dice, sit down and write a detective novel. That novel became the international best-selling The Silent Patient. It's been published in over 50 languages now, and it's a world record breaker. It's the first UK debut, first UK adult debut ever to debut at #1 on the New York Times bestseller list, which, as we all know, is the ultimate arbiter for success in the US. Brad Pitt's production company, Plan B, have secured the film rights, and we now have The Maidens. So, Alex, you are very welcome. You're going to be in conversation with Sam Blake. I'm going to sit in the corner like a kind of invigilator and then pop back in at the end. But welcome.
Oops, we just had to count you in there, Alex. There we go. Right.
Hello.
Hi
Thanks,
there.
Thanks very much for having me.
Oh, we're delighted to have you. Now, let me I'm just going to put the book cover up as well. There we go. So there we go. We're in our corners now. Yeah, we've got guys. It's lovely to be back. Very warm welcome. I can see people joining us now from all over the place, UK and different places. We are back here, obviously, on writing.ie. And we have Simon in the corner here because my internet this morning decided to play up. So just in case I vanished completely, he will pick up the conversation with Alex rather than leaving Alex to do his
monologue.
Yeah, his soliloquy in the middle of and talk to you on his own. I'm really excited about this, Alex. It's so interesting to hear about how The Silent Patient came about and your background and how everything really has fed into producing these amazing novels. So I really want to start with talking to you about Agatha Christie, because that has been a huge influence, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's a good place to start. She's my main influence, really. You know, I think about her all the time, and some people laugh when I bring her up, you know, particularly abroad. But she may not have been, you know, the best stylist in the world, but there is nothing that she doesn't know about plot and setup and payoff and red herrings and twists, and you know, there's not a word or a sentence that's wasted in Christie. There's something that's a reason that everything is there. And what I love about her the most is this sort of, you read the first half or 2/3 of her novel and you think, okay, well, this doesn't really matter, or that's not important. And then in the last third, everything starts chiming, you know, one thing after another, and you realize that everything you've seen before has been leading up to it. So she's just got a mind like a kaleidoscope. It's incredible, an absolute genius. And she taught me everything really about how to write a detective story.
It's fascinating. And you've read her books multiple times, all of them multiple times, haven't you? So you've really analysed them in a big way.
Yeah, I started when I was about, 12, 13, I can't remember exactly, but I snuck into my sister's room and she had them all on a shelf, my older sister, and I don't know, I was just attracted to them and picked them up, and they were the first adult books that I ever read. And then one summer on the beach in Cyprus, I just devoured them one after the other, and I felt that if I were ever to write a novel, it would be that kind of novel. It'd be a detective story with a twist at the end. you know.
Yeah.
So my fate was sealed at a pretty young age.
Absolutely. And you always had that feeling. I love the fact that you always had that feeling that you were going to write a book, that it was something that was always going to be, that was the thing you were going to be doing ultimately.
It was always that kind of book. I don't really have an interest in writing any other kind of novel, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and you brought it all together. And I was reading there that you chose to set the silent patient in a psychiatric hospital because Christie hadn't.
Yeah, well, you know, I was working in a psychiatric unit, and it occurred to me one day that, oh gosh, this would be an amazing place for a mystery, and I thought Christie had never done that. And then with the Maidens, when I finished The Silent Patient, I thought, okay, well, where else had Christie not set a novel? And you know, the reason that you need something like that is because in this kind of world, you need a kind of iconic enclosed location. Yeah. And Christie did that so brilliantly when every single book is different. You know, an aeroplane, a private island, a remote house. You know, it can go on and on and on. They're all different, and they all kind of contain the story. You know, and so I thought, oh, well, I know about a Cambridge College because I studied at Cambridge, and I thought she'd never set a novel at university because she didn't go to university, so she didn't really have the experience, I think, to write that world in a realistic way. And I thought, okay, well, that's something else that I could try and do that she hasn't done.
Yeah. I think it's just brilliant. It's fantastic to hear, because she is the absolute ace, isn't she? And it's fantastic to hear how influenced you can be and how you can draw out all of those threads. And you can see them completely in the books. The Maidens has literally just fallen off my knee, so I'm going to dip down and grab it. Just go 1 second. And
I thought you meant metaphorically.
No, literally. There it is. There's the book. And yeah, as you say, it's set in Cambridge, and that sense of Cambridge and the sense of place, which actually we get from Christie as well, because she created her locations were amazing as well. You absolutely have the sense of Cambridge. It seeped in it, this book, isn't it? Mariana is our sort of heroine, and she's a group therapist, isn't she? And she goes back to visit her daughter, her stepdaughter, niece, Zoe, in Cambridge, and because something awful has happened there. But she goes to the pub, and she goes to all of those things that you do in Cambridge. There's people cycling around the place and punts, and it really your sense of location is fantastic. So I really feel that's come through. Did you find that easy to write because you knew it so well?
Well, it was a decision. It was a kind of a joyful decision, really, because the Maidens was pretty much all set, you know, inside a psychiatric unit, and so a little bit outside, you know, following Theo, but small. And I thought, okay, I want to try and write something with a bigger canvas and more locations, because I just felt, you know, I want to write another chamber piece with one main location. I thought I'd like to try and write about a city and, you know, and Cambridge and colleges and stuff like that. So I hadn't been there, you know, in 20 years since I go back periodically, but for any length of time. And so I went and took a little notebook with me a few times while I was writing the novel, and would then walk myself through the novel, trying to be exactly where Mariana was meant to be at specific times. And so if she was meant to be in the pub at like 9 p.m., I'd go and sit in the pub at 9, and then would write down what I was, you know, seeing, smelling, feeling. But what was interesting about it, and what was unexpected, was that what grew from that was not just an atmospheric note-taking. What turned out, because she's a woman haunted by her past, by her dead lover and her youth and everything she's lost. And so what happened is that as the days went on, and I was kind of walking around Cambridge on my own, I started to get lonelier and lonelier, and then started to be haunted by my past, by, you know, ghosts of myself at 18 and friends I'd lost or whatever. And I ended up kind of fusing with Mariana slightly, and I was able to put all of that stuff into the character, which made it deeper and enriched the novel, I think.
It's incredible. It's incredible to hear that, and that it's you were literally living it, and that comes through on the page. I mean, it really does. She's such a clear character. Yeah, and you have got the contrast in locations, because we start off in London, don't we, where she's living before she goes back to Cambridge. No, it's really, really incredible. And did you start off? I want to get into details about your process and how you write and the screenwriting and stuff in a moment. But did you start off with the idea that it was going to be? I'm really interested in the influence of the Greek tragedies, and that's obviously something that you've been brought up with, and so it's sort of in the same way that I would be brought up with Shakespeare, that's the thing that's in your background. Were you conscious of bringing that into the Maidens, because it's a very, very strong thread, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's similarly with the Silent Patient. It was a kind of there's not much choice to it, really, because, you know, I grew up in Cyprus, and there's, you know, kind of immersed in the Greek myths. The island features really heavily in Greek mythology, and there are relics and ruins of gods and goddesses all over the island. And so it was always a major inspiration. And like you said, at school, I kind of learnt Homer and Euripides and not really much Shakespeare.
Yeah.
And so I was introduced to the tragedies at a very early age. And then I sort of specialized in Greek tragedy at Cambridge too. So I had a kind of, they were also hit me there too as well. And they just haunted me. And what I love about them is how timeless these stories are. And right now there's obviously a real trend to reimagine them and take them apart and put them back together from like a modern psychological perspective or a feminist perspective or whatever. And they still hold water. So, like in The Silent Patient, Alicia's silence was based on the silence of Alcestis, which was written thousands of years ago by Euripides. And yet all the people who read the book seem to relate to it today, which is astonishing to me, And so I just felt like the Maidens, it felt again like it's a story about grief and loss. And so as a Greek person, the first thing you think of is the myth of Persephone, and taken to the underworld and her mother's devastating grief for her. So that seemed like a good association thematically, and then it led into plot as well. I always think of it as like a backwards and forwards. You must experience this too, right? It's like one thing leads to another, and so you go from something thematic becomes a plot idea, and then the plot idea gives you an idea for something thematic, and you kind of, and
it all links in together. I know, I do. I find that, and what I find wonderful is that as the thing develops, it's nearly like the breadcrumbs are there, and the first idea, you might not have seen all the detail of the first idea, but by the time you get to the end, you've discovered actually it was all there for you.
That's why so many drafts are important. Billy Wilder said the most important thing for each draft is a direct quote. He said to go deeper into the thing each time. And I always remember that. So it's exactly what you're saying. You kind of get to the end, and you're like, oh, I understand now what I need to do at the beginning. And you go and do it again and then again and again.
And make it better. That's a brilliant quote, isn't it? That's exactly what a draft is about, isn't it? It's literally it's getting more to grips with the story as you go along through. And did you find, talking about Billy Wilder, did you find your screenwriting experience fed into writing The Silent Patient as well? When you first
yes and no. It's complicated. I felt I picked up a kind of economy and speed from screenwriting, which definitely helped me. But then on the other hand, I just don't think I was particularly good at it. I think I always found it very hard to dramatize a scene. And so when I was, wrote my first novel and realized that I could go inside a character's head and go backwards and forwards in time, or go for a walk with her around Heath, or all these kinds of other things that you can't necessarily do in a screenplay because they deviate from that relentless train of a plot. And that liberated me massively. And I just finally felt comfortable writing something. And I thought, oh, okay, I need to be doing this instead of screenplays,
Yeah, you found your niche, really. I love the way that you talk about, that you couldn't ignore the Greek legends and you couldn't ignore Christie. And I think when I'm working with new authors, we're always looking at, you're very conscious of the fact that you're drawing on all those experiences.
And then they often combine and, and unite. So for me, it was like I had a sudden brave way one day when I thought, oh, but all Greek tragedies are essentially detective stories. And so, Oedipus is a detective story. They all are. They're all trying to seek some truth, which is revealed to them at the end. And so that felt like a very nice thematic link between the two genres as well.
Oh, it's fantastic. It's just brilliant. It's just, you can feel it. You can feel it coming off the page and feel it coming off you. And it's really exciting. In terms of like plotting and planning and coming up with the idea, did you have, I'm also going to get back to you about your agent as well, The Silent Patient, because I know people are going to be asking about that in a second. But I have so many questions in my head now. They're all jumping up and down. So in terms of plotting and planning, when you were writing The Silent Patient, did you have a good idea of where that story was going to go before you started? Did you plot it out in detail, or was it more organically written?
Yeah, I mean, so I obsessively plot. I studied screenwriting at the American Film Institute in Los Angeles, and I had a really great teacher who was a Disney writer. And there were many things that he said to me which I treasure and remember. And one of them was, don't waste time writing drafts. I mean, I do that too, but he would always say, don't write drafts because it takes so long. He said, just work on your outlines solidly for a year, again and again and again and again. And so I tend to really work heavily on the beat sheet or the outline or the treatment, or whatever you want to call it. But with The Silent Patient, it was lovely. I was walking on the heath and I'd been mulling over this detective story idea. And then the whole thing came to me in a flash. And I sat down on a bench and I wrote it on my phone. And I still have it stored on my phone. And it didn't change.
Wow.
Unhappily, that experience was never repeated.
I know, but it's that moment when it all falls into place, that sort of eureka moment. It's just wonderful, isn't it? It's just when you get something and you just get, and sometimes it can be a small idea. It's not as big a one as that, but it just is. I think that's what being a writer that's what makes being a writer amazing. I think it's those
it does, and I really believe in hard work, and I work really hard. You know, talent is harder to quantify, but you can show up, and I think the more hard work you do and the more you show up, the more likely little miracles like that occur, I think.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. Do you, in terms of your writing day, because obviously you're a full-time writer now, you're doing other bits and pieces too, but how do you structure your day?
I take it pretty slowly. I'm really privileged in that, you know, I'm paid to write books now, which is heaven. Writing screenplays is always more frantic, and you're always dealing with a million other people.
Yeah.
And also the fact that there's no timeline. I mean, my publishers would like books a bit sooner than I could give them to them, but I don't feel pressured or rushed. So I take it really slowly. So you know, it's not everyone is lucky enough to be able to do that. But for me, it's about maintaining the joy and the fun of it.
Yeah.
And if I'm trying to write 3 chapters in one day, it's no fun, and I start to hate it. And then then you kind of stop having really good ideas.
Yeah.
So I do 1 chapter a day, and I just, you know, I get up, I go to the gym, come back, meditate, and then sit down and do my 1 chapter, which may be anything from 3 to 6 pages, because I have a tiny attention span. So I don't write very long chapters. And then I go for a walk, and then more ideas come. When I come back, I make more notes for the next day, and then I stop. And Hemingway said that, you know, there's a great book. It's collected writings that he wrote about writing, which I've read many times. And in that, he says you've got to just you've got to allow the kind of subconscious, the well of the subconscious, to refill overnight. And so he says the worst thing you can do is to kind of decide what you're going to write tomorrow, plan it all out. You know, he says stop when you're ahead. So you finish a chapter, you feel in a good place, stop, and then let your subconscious work overnight.
Yeah.
Without thinking about it too much. And I find that very helpful.
It's so true, because those connections come then, don't they? The things you didn't see and the bits that then you can add on. And would you then the next day go over that previous chapter before you move on to the next one, or do you just keep writing through?
I don't. I just keep writing through. I don't even worry too much about grammar or stuff like that. You know, at the AFI, they taught us that the editing side of the brain and the creative side of the brain are 2 different sides of the brain. And if you try and use them at the same time, you just kind of get an impasse and you can't do anything productive. So whether or not that's true, I don't know. But the way that I learned is always just to write and not edit and not judge and just splurge it all out. And then a few weeks later, put on the editing hat and sit down, print it out, get a pen or a pencil, and then, you know, and then start analyzing and cutting and rewriting stuff. But the actual first draft has to be in a very kind of dreamlike state.
That's amazing. That's like that. I feel like that's one of those. We're getting some real nuggets of gold through this, and that's one of those absolute moments. Nobody we've interviewed has mentioned that, and but you are so right. Now, when you say it, it's like, oh my god, yeah. It's like, yeah. I mean, I would again write that hot mess of a first draft and just keep on going through. But
yeah, I don't recommend editing and writing on the same day. I think it's a really bad idea.
Yeah. I love the idea of being able to walk off and then think about and consider what you've written and make the best of the connections.
Yeah.
But I think those short chapters that you write work brilliantly because they increase the pace of the book. So you don't stop reading this. It's one of those books that you think, you know, the thing when you're going to bed at night and you just like just one more chapter, but because they are relatively short, you're moving along the whole time. And I'm
a terrible reader, you know, because like the first thing I do when I open start a chapter is flick, see how many pages it is. And if it's too many pages, it feels overwhelming to me and I feel like I can't do it. And so I think that's because we all are now, because of cinema and TV and everything else, our attention span is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And that definitely comes from movies. My writing teacher in LA always said, you got to keep people on the train. And, you know, and he would talk about it in terms of reading a screenplay. And so you can't, he said, if you have something that's obscure or confusing, or 2 characters with a similar name, and you make the reader stop and go back, he says it's over, it's dead. It doesn't, you've got to keep them on the train. It can't stop. It has to keep moving. So everything has to be working towards that kind of clarity and that speed, and, you know.
Yeah, more gold there. Do you teach screenwriting, Alex? I think you should. Or just teach writing generally.
I'd like to one day do a little bit writing teaching, but I wouldn't presume to teach screenplay writing.
Well, writing, but just I think it's that confluence, isn't it, of experience that comes together to produce a brilliant book. And that's
what you learn from studying other writers and also, you know, talking to writers. I think you're always trying to improve. I'm always trying to improve.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, me too. And that's the thing we're finding actually through this series of interviews, is that everybody has a different, we all produce the same product, or obviously some products are more successful than others, but you're essentially, you're producing a book at the end of the day, but everybody's approach is so different. And it's mining that creativity and taking the bits from your experience and from somebody else's experiences, for writers to be able to create their own process, that I think is so important. It's absolutely fascinating. It really is. One of the things I was laughing at, actually, when we were just going back to you being in Trinity in Cambridge, was that your acting, and how your writing professor told you you needed to stop acting or you wouldn't get your degree. Did you find that useful? Is that something else that feeds into this process?
No, I don't really. I mean, I think that's where it all kind of went slightly wrong for me, is that I wrote screenplays because I love plays and I love being in a play and I love being on a film set. It's so much fun, and I love being around people. And so I was drawn to it because I thought, oh, well, I want to be in that world, as opposed to necessarily thinking I was really good at it. I wasn't a very good actor and I wasn't a very good screenplay writer, but I wanted to be part of it. Tom Stoppard once said that we're often not very good at the things that we really love. And I think that's very true. You know, I think I'm a better fan of films than I was a writer of them. And I was not a good actor. But all these things, you know, they lead you to where they lead you. And then I look back on my life now, and I think there has been a trajectory leading me to write novels. It's all helpful in the end, I think.
Yeah, it's all feeding in. It's fantastic. So going back to The Silent Patient, when you finished that, talk to us about how you landed your agent, the gorgeous Sam Copeland.
It's gorgeous, Sam Copeland. Sam is amazing. I wrote the book. I didn't have an agent at that point. I'd been dropped by my last screenplay agent, and so screenwriting agent. So I just wrote the book pretty much for myself, and as a kind of exercise in seeing if I could write a love letter to that genre. So I wrote it, and then again with like no speed at all, spent a long time revising it. I think I probably edited it intensely for about a year, and then I thought, okay, it's ready now. So I looked with no expectation online, trying to find an agent who would read an unsolicited manuscript, and there aren't many. And Sam would, or at least consider it. So I emailed him and just said, look, this is my situation. I was a screenwriter. I'd like to try being a novelist. I've written this novel. Would you have a look? And he read the first 3 chapters, and then he got back the next day and said, why don't you send over the whole book? And then 2 days later, he said, why don't you come into the office? And then I signed with him. And then a week later, it was at auction. So it was the only time in my life where I hadn't received endless rejections on the path to something. It was the only time when it was just like, yes, yes, yes. Yeah. And it was a wonderful feeling, actually. Yeah.
Oh, I can imagine. It's fantastic. He's such a lovely guy, and
I think it sounds amazing. Yeah.
He is really super, and I think it's that confluence. It feels like all the things that you had done took you to that point, took you to that eureka moment on the heath, and then you put the work in. It is about showing up to produce this manuscript, and then it all happened.
And it's about having something to say as well, you know. And I do think look back on my life, because my big regret is that, you know, I didn't start writing Silent Patient until I was 36. And I think, gosh, well, you know, all these years beforehand. But then on the other hand, if I hadn't worked in a psychiatric unit, if I hadn't studied therapy, if I hadn't been in therapy, if I hadn't had all these experiences, what on earth would I have written about? Yeah. And so I do think, you know, even though I wish I'd started a decade earlier, perhaps, I do think that part of, you know, gaining maturity and growing up and being an adult is what makes you into a writer. And I'm not one of those geniuses who can write a novel at 22.
Yeah, no, it is. It's life experience, and and that plays across the page. Therapy is really interesting, and obviously you're pulling on that for both books, for Silent Patient, and Mariana's a group therapist in the Maidens, and her psychotherapy, her sort of insight into the way the story unfolds, which involves a murder of Zoe, her niece's best friend, in the first instance, and then subsequent murders afterwards. Her interpretation of things and people is really interesting. Did you find yourself drawing a lot on your own experience there?
Yeah, I did. I felt I still had stuff to say about psychotherapy after the first novel, because I actually specialized in group therapy. And so that was something I wanted to write about in the Maidens. I definitely have rather an ambivalent relationship to therapy now, because, you know, one of the main reasons that I quit my training is that I sort of I felt that even though I'd met a great number of really, really talented, amazing therapists, I'd also met an equal number of completely crazy therapists who were as screwed up as the people they were trying to help. And I just felt that I'd never seen that portrayed really in a realistic way. So that was part of the reason I wanted to write the novel, to write a hero who was a troubled psychotherapist. And then likewise with Mariana too, I felt like I wanted to try and explore that a little bit further. So yeah, but there's a lot of stuff about therapy in both books, which I think I'm kind of done with it now, to be honest with you. I'm not sure if I'm going to write a third book about
something else now.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting, because I always think when I read a book, I like to learn something new, as well as getting a great story and great locations, and being hooked by that. I always feel I want to come away from it with something new. And I didn't know anything about group therapy. I'm not great on Greek tragedy either. So I'm now fascinated by Greek tragedy, and I'm going to be doing loads of Googling and finding out about the different stories. So with the Maidens, you really do come away with an insight into a world that you're not familiar with. And I think that's fantastic.
Well, I agree with you. I like to learn stuff when I read too. And I think a lot of the problem with a lot of thrillers is that they're quite empty. And they leave you feeling quite empty at the end, because it's just about a plot. And that was always my point, or my goal, was to try and marry a kind of Christie style plotting with a deeper emotional, psychological complexity. And so it's nice to layer stuff in. But you know what P.D. James said about the genre, I think about that every day, is she thinks it always said it was the best genre, because you have this structure of, crime, investigation, solution. And within that structure, you can hold so much other stuff, all your thoughts about God or grief or psychotherapy or love or whatever. You can layer that into the novel, but the detection plot holds it secure.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't know how to write any other kind of novel without that supporting structure now.
Yeah, no, I think it's brilliant. I think it's great, and it's so true, because I think crime particularly there are so many subgenres and so many ways you can take it, that there's no restriction really. You can play around with it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right the way through, from police procedurals to psychological thrillers, and then all the other things that come in between in terms of the different. So it's an exciting place to be. It's great. No, I really love the book, and just the whole process is fascinating. Is there anything? What's your sort of top tip for writers? I can see the questions are coming through here, so I'm going to pull Simon in a second, and we'll go through some of them. But
top tip is rewrite. Writing is rewriting. It really is, and I meet people endlessly who think that they've written one draft of a novel or two drafts of a screenplay and it's finished, and it's really not finished. It's not. I'd lost count of how many drafts I did The Silent Patient, close to 50 probably. It was just non-stop, again and again and again and again, because you just have to make it as good as you possibly can. And if there's one correction in there, then it's not good enough for me.
Yeah.
There's a great story I always think about that Richard Curtis said, that it was draft 25 of 4 Weddings and a Funeral that he sent out. And what does that mean? That tells us that draft 24 was not good enough.
Yeah.
And I think that's something to really hold on to. You have to, no one gets it right the first time. It's like painting, you just add layer and layer and layer to it. So yeah, rewriting is key, I think.
That's brilliant. Yeah. And that story, draft 25 is just, he knows what he's doing too. It's like when you get somebody at that level who's not prepared to send out an early draft. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that writers tend to make, is sending out stuff too soon.
I used to when I was a screenplay writer all the time, and I learned to my cost. That's the thing.
Yeah,
you can't do that.
Yeah, and you spent a year on Silent Patient. How long did The Maidens take you to write in the end?
3 years.
3 years.
Yeah, but again, it was like a lot of that was editing and rewriting. And then I also began with an idea which wasn't working, and it took a lot of courage to stop and then try something else as well. So it was a kind of organic process. It was good though. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, that's the key, isn't it? You have to enjoy it. You have to love it. So, Simon, are you keeping an eye on these questions? I can see there's all sorts of people popping up. Everybody's loving The Silent Patient.
Yeah, no, there's some. Yeah, no, I mean, I'm interested in Alex, I'm interested in how much you study your own craft, and I think the fact that you've mentioned P.D. James, Hemingway, Stoppard, Curtis. I think it is important to look at the greats, isn't it, and see how they've achieved. So some people are interested in. You talk about don't waste your time writing drafts, and I think that's a really interesting point. But it sounds to me what you're doing is you're almost kind of storyboarding. You're writing a treatment that is in real detail. Does that make the actual writing of the book any less of an enjoyable experience? Is there a danger that there are less surprises for you as a writer when you come to?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think the way that I work is that I have an outline,
Yeah.
which starts off about 1 page long, and then I keep adding to it, and so it expands and ends up like 80,000 words, but it's always the same document, just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. But I do really believe that with the kind of novel that I write, a detective story, is very much about the structure, it's about the architecture of it all. And I think that unless you have the architecture down, the building's going to fall around your ears. You know, you have to, you have to understand where you're going, what the twist is, how to, so it's like a magic trick. It's not like an ordinary novel. You're trying to do all kinds of things. You're trying to tell the secret story, which is the murderer's story, and that's hidden until the end of the book. And then on top of that, you're trying to write the detective story, which is the apparent story, and discoveries and clues, and all these kinds of things aren't, for me, don't come just organically. They require an awful lot of planning. Where I do allow myself freedom always is the dialogue. I don't plan the dialogue until I actually write the first draft.
Okay.
And so I know, because again, that came from bitter experience of like, okay, so I really taught myself to write through studying Billy Wilder, because I think he's incredible.
Yeah.
And so, there's many things. There's a great book he did with Cameron Crowe, which is called Interviews with Billy Wilder, which I've read many, many times. And in that, he gives all kinds of incredible advice, and the main one he gives is that you can't give. He's talking about films, but I think it applies to books too. He says you can't give a plot beat or a major, revelation through dialogue. He says you can do it with dialogue, but you also have to find an image, a prop to represent it. And so he uses like a cracked mirror, or an example I often love to think about is in Love in the Afternoon, and the way Maurice Chevalier finds out that his daughter Audrey Hepburn is in love. I would attempt that with dialogue, and Billy Wilder says that's wrong. So what Chevalier does is he opens the fridge, and inside the fridge he sees that she's keeping a rose alive in a little glass of water. And he looks at that, and then he looks at her through the door, and he sees her sort of humming to herself like this, and you get it straight away. That's great writing.
Yeah.
That's what we aspire to, and so for me it's about finding that kind of stuff constantly, and that involves a lot of walking around a park and just mulling something over.
It's brilliant. Those using the symbolism and that really showing the reader, and
then it leads to plot ideas. So with the Maidens, I was trying to find some way of the killer identifying his victims, and I thought, okay, well, I can't do it with a dialogue thing. What can I do? And I had the idea of, maybe he leaves kind of taunting messages on postcards in ancient Greek, taken from Greek tragedies, in their rooms. And then that turns into plot, so it's all kind of one. That's what I meant earlier about one thing feeds into another, really.
Yeah, I love that detail.
Yeah.
I really love that detail. It was great.
I mean, it's interesting, I think a lot of people almost use Agatha Christie as a kind of almost pejorative term, don't they? But if you think about some of the things she was doing in her books, I mean, think of something like the murder of Roger Ackroyd. That was an incredibly, that kind of changed the genre, didn't it?
All of them. And I spend an awful lot of time apologizing or defending her, and it's sort of, it's fine. It is what it is. I understand why. There's often things in her books that are a bit clunky in terms of style, but or character, but when she's at her absolute best, like in, let's say, Five Little Pigs is my favorite, is when she resolves the character beat, the character resolution, and the plot twist in the same beat. It's magic. And often the characters aren't deep, but when they are deep, like in Five Little Pigs or The Hollow, it's devastating. It really is.
Yeah, I mean, I think also people, if you go back to the original books, they're often much more complex than our kind of impression of Agatha Christie from the sort of, thatched cottages, sort of picture postcard TV that, for a while was the mainstay on television. But I just wondered about, when your books are adapted for screen, how closely involved, I know you don't want to write them, but how closely involved do you want to be with that process? Because it can often change the vision of a book very quickly, can't it?
Yeah, I'm not remotely involved. I don't want to write scripts, and I don't think that you can control the film. The book exists, and it's going to be an adaptation of it. With the Silent Patient, Plan B's making it, and they make really great films, so I'm very excited to see it, and I'm a huge movie fan. And so I'm not in any way intending to read the screenplay, even, because I know from bitter experience that the screenplay often doesn't even resemble the film. It's a director's medium. So I'd much rather just see it as a fan and be in the cinema and watch it. And likewise with the Maidens, I spoke to the writer who's adapting it for TV, and she had questions for me. And then ultimately I just said, you know what, I think it's your baby now, and you have to take it, and you have to make these decisions on your own. I don't want to step on your toes, and I don't want to be breathing down your neck. Because every story gets retold. You know, I know that from movies, that first the writer tells it, and then the director takes it, and then he tells it. And then finally, the editor in the editing room retells it all again from the beginning, from pieces of film put together. And so everyone has to be allowed to tell their own version of this tale. And to try and control it, I think it's a really bad move on my part.
I think that's brilliant. It's genius. Yeah, because I think you're so right. You're so right about having the book, and you've got the book and it's written and it's out there. And then, the adaptation's it's a different beast, isn't it? You've got the actors are coming in there with their interpretation too, and it's a whole different experience.
I think when I was younger, I was very rigid as a writer. When I was young, like in my early 20s, and I would get hung up on ideas that I thought were brilliant, or bits of dialogue that I thought were amazing, and I wouldn't change them, and I would get into conflict with directors that I was working with and stuff like that. And now I've realized that actually that's an awful thing to be. Now I always think about that scene from Educating Rita, where she's just like, if this is rubbish, let's just tear it up, throw it in the fire and start again. And that's what I tend to do now. I tend to be very, very happy just to tear a line through something, think, okay, I'm going to try and reimagine it in a different way.
Yeah.
And so I think the less controlling you are and the more fluid you are, the better you are as a writer.
Yeah, absolutely. It's killing your darlings, isn't it? It's that
it
thing.
Is. It's painful. But
it is. Yeah. I think it's always a sign if you really, really love something, and you just think it's amazing, then it's probably not. And it'll be the first thing that gets cut.
It's always true. Yeah, it is.
Yeah, no, definitely.
So is it sometimes with you, the story you're going to tell, you're just not quite sure which direction you're looking in when you're telling it?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of I guess it's helped by the structure, So it's less vague than that, because I know that there has to be a crime and an investigation and a solution, and that's what I always hang on to. And so at least that gives you like the three major elements of the novel that you can hold to. But I don't know where ideas come from, if that's what you're asking. I don't know where they come from. They just sort of, it's quite dreamlike, isn't it? I think often the way things appear in your,
I mean, I think just going back to Christie, it seems to me that, I mean, I've read all the books as well. There are a lot of ideas that get reused, aren't there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think I fear that if I ever met her, she might ask for her plots back. But but that again, it's a bit like Greek mythology at this point. You can take things to reimagine them and reuse them. And I'm obsessed with Christie. So I have a piece of paper where I analysed all of her plots, and I realised that what made her into a writer, in my opinion, is when her husband left her, when Archie left her. Before that, she had a great facility for plot, but the stories were empty and shallow. And then after that, pretty much every single great novel she ever wrote for the next 500 years was always about a love triangle. It was always about us looking at a love triangle and looking at it from the wrong way around. So we always think A is leaving B for C, but in fact, C and A are planning to kill B. There's always like this little, twist and turnaround that she does. She permeates again and again and again.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. It's fascinating. I love all of that. But it's all emotional as well, because it's not just about stealing money from a bank. It's about having your heart broken and then revenge and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I was always a fan. I quite like those Parker Pyne books. I mean, they're quite they're quite sort of naive and sort of simple little short stories. But I think it's a good character, Parker Pyne.
Yeah. Has it been done for TV? I'm not sure it has, or maybe not.
I don't think it has, and I'm sure somebody will get around to it at some point. But which other authors are you influenced by? I mean, obviously, Christie's a big, is the mother lode. But who else have you read that you feel has influenced?
Currently, I'm obsessed with Barbara Vine, with Ruth Rendell writing as Barbara Vine. I just can't get over how good they are. They're so good. I mean, I used to love Ruth Rendell, but now I'm kind of reading all of the Barbara Vines, and they are just mind-blowing. Again, because you're left with this feeling, as you were saying, if you're learning something, it's a deeply rich world. I just finished reading Asta's book, and I was in Spain doing press, and in between the interviews, I was just taking it out and reading. I couldn't put it down. And that's a story about a woman who in 1900 was a Danish immigrant in London, and she wrote these series of diaries for 60 years that ended up becoming worldwide bestsellers. And then one day her granddaughter Anne discovers that 5 pages have been torn out of one of the diaries, and that they're hiding a murder. And so she's trying to investigate by written in between the lines of these diaries from 100 years ago.
Wow.
There's murder in there, and she's trying to solve it. And so you're learning not just about, a great murder twist, but you're learning about life in 1900. You're learning about an experience of a Danish immigrant. You're learning all of this stuff. And the characters are so real and rich and incredible. And so it shows you what you can do with the genre of psychological fiction. I think she's a lot more talented than I am, but she's able to transcend that and make the thriller into something that's really a great work of art, which is what I really, aspire to. She's incredible. Yeah.
That's good tip.
Brilliant.
I'll be going off my nose too now.
I recommend everybody reads it. It's such a good book.
Got another question here. I mean, clearly you wrote your first novel kind of in isolation, and then you got an agent and great things happened. Has the experience of writing the second novel been very different? I mean, clearly there's a weight of expectation. There are kind of 50 publishers crowded into your room looking over your shoulder, aren't there, as you're writing it? Does it feel different?
Yeah, it did. I mean, I was lucky in that I sold it 2 years before it was published, so I had a chance to begin. Otherwise, I would have been overwhelmed by it, I think. But what happened is that I was just determined not to get swamped with all of these voices. And so I just tried to write it for myself again. I tried to go back to being, so when I wrote Silent Patient, the best part of that process for me was when I finally had a draft that I was happy with. And then as I'd written the thriller in order for myself to read a new kind of Christie-style book on the beach, I printed it out and I went to Spain and I sat on the beach with several bottles of rosé and I read it over 4 days. And I was happy. When I got to the end, I was like, I'm really, really feel pleased with that.
Wow.
It's an achievement. It's a project. So for the second book, I just tried to write another thriller for myself to read on the beach. And it sounds simplistic, but when you keep coming back to it, helps you, helps you focus. The pandemic also helped massively because I was kind of running from it, I think, for a while, and traveling and doing different countries and doing press. And then when I was just locked in my flat for a year on my own, I just had to sit at the kitchen table and just get on with it. Without that, I think I could have spent another year or so procrastinating, probably.
Yeah, it's always the easiest thing to do, isn't it?
Yeah.
My stairs get hoovered a lot when I have to.
I know, totally. It's ridiculous. You just the endless organising and tidying and
stuff you would never normally do.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And does the idea for the next book sort of start annoying you while you're writing the current one, or are you quite good at kind of leaving it alone in another room?
No, I guess no. I think about it a lot. I think about, because I came to it late, I've had lots of ideas that I've thought over the past 20 years, that would make a good book or a good movie, that would be a good idea. And so I've always been percolating with these ideas and they continue, but then you do dim them out and, focus entirely on one thing. But, it's a good question because I thought I would be really burnt out after the Silent Patient, after the Maidens. And I thought, okay, I'm going to take a long time off. But the moment I finished it and sent it to my editors, I immediately started to think about the next book. Felt very buoyed and freed up. I think because the second novel is hard to write. It is, it's just, you've put your whole life into the first one and you've had years to write the first one, and then you have to turn around and write another book. And then you go from being a debut novelist to actually being a novelist and having a career. And it's definitely harder. And so the fact that I feel I managed to get over that hurdle and finish the second novel makes me feel so happy, and it's totally freed me up now. So I feel my imagination is very alive, and I feel very excited about writing the next thing, which was totally unexpected, actually.
Wonderful. Wow.
And you relate to that, right?
Yeah. Totally. I mean, because the second book is really hard. My second book was horrible to write. And then I think, and I find that with every book, actually, that you spend so long with it and you're very intensely with it. When you finished it and it goes off, that's when it's nearly like you can open your mind to the new ideas and give them some space, and then they've been crowding there at the back of your subconscious. I think I'm all about the subconscious mind, and it's all happening in there, and that they're waiting to go. And so then it's exciting, and I love that. To me, I love the planning process. I love that.
Me too.
Idea.
It's my favorite part.
Yeah, it's the best bit of anything can happen, and you're getting to know the characters and what they're going to take you, because that's that thing you were saying right at the start there about when you're layering stuff up, how you go back and you find that there's things that were hidden that you didn't see to start with.
Yeah, totally. Which is why it's great, I think. Not everybody works like that, but that's why I think it's helpful to have it as an outline on a piece of paper that you just mess around with for ages, as opposed to trying to write a paragraph of prose or a chapter. I mean, I find that difficult unless I know exactly what I need to say.
Yeah. No, I mean the exact same. I've all these notepads, and they're just scribbling down on bits of paper. And it's something about, I think, writing it physically as opposed to typing it makes a big difference. And it's that connection, and it's the mind and arrows and scribbly out bits and stuff. And there could be, I use these legal pads, and there could be 20 pages of stuff of just nonsense that you're finding your way through.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, that's great. Oh, fantastic. It's so interesting. Everything. Somebody was asking there earlier about why you were dropped by your, I think I know the answer to this, but why your first screenwriting agent dropped you.
It was my third screenwriting agent, to be honest with you, who dropped me, because the films were not good, and it was just, I wasn't accessing depth. I wasn't good, and it was only when I started to write a novel that I thought, oh, this is how you do it. This is how you access depth. And so it just means I don't think it says anything about screenplay medium. I think it says just that I was in the wrong job. I think that's what it says.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I think it's brilliant that you found the right job. I mean, that's just like a revelation, isn't it, in many ways?
A friend of mine is a critic, and when he read The Silent Patient, he said, oh, Alex, it's so obvious to me where you were going wrong. You're not a dramatist, you're a novelist.
Yeah. And
I just think it's something as simple as that. It's just finding the right thing that doesn't feel like pulling teeth. It always felt like pulling teeth writing scripts, but I love movies, so
Yeah. So it was a logical, but I think it's that same visualization, isn't it? And when you're bringing something to the page, if you've got that clear picture, and that's something that comes through in the Maidens so clearly, is that image. I feel like I'm walking through Cambridge with them, and going into the rooms and the.
Great to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, it's years since I've been to Cambridge. I went to have a look at the colleges when I was thinking about going there, and having a look at all the accommodation and everything. And it's such a clear reminder, and the bedders and everything. The detail is beautiful. And so you feel like you're stepping into that world, which is like stepping nearly into a movie.
Kind of, maybe. Yeah.
Fantastic. No, it's really, really, really good. Can you say anything else there, Simon? They've been busy here.
They have, yeah. No, I think there's going to be a lot of people who've already read and really enjoyed the debut, and I'm sure will now be ordering the Maidens, which is great. Just wondered about, I mean, as you become more mature as a novelist, do you think you're going to be doing fewer drafts? Is each draft going to be a richer load?
I would like to. No, I don't know about that, but what I really would like to do would be to bring in my editor sooner. I have two really fantastic editors. We worked together, the three of us together, one in New York, one in London, and they did such an amazing job on The Maidens. And I mean, maybe you'll relate to this, but what killed me the most, I think, about the drafts that I did, both The Silent Patient and The Maidens, is that you spend 6 months rewriting and thinking it's completely radically different, and then you compare it to the draft that you had 6 months ago, and it's exactly the same. And I was just like, what on earth is going on? And so a lot of it's fear, and a lot of it's like just fear of rejection or fear of criticism, and it held me back from giving a draft to my editors. So I would like to give the drafts at least 6 months sooner to the editors, and then we can work on it together. There's something about the endless rewriting, which is definitely an anxiety-led thing on my part. Yeah.
Yeah, I think
the thing I'm writing now, I'm just trying to write something as an experiment, and it's to see if I can write something without that endless planning. And I'm surprising myself as I write it, and I'm enjoying it. But I don't have that safety net now, the planning, so I don't know if it's going to be any good or not. But we'll see.
Well, that's nice, because that's freeing, isn't it? That gives you, that's just a way, like a new way to try it. So and you're not putting yourself under pressure that this is going to be the thing. It
is. It helps when there's no pressure attached, and then you can kind of rediscover It was nice. It's really nice writing it, because I'm sitting every day and just writing with a smile on my face, which I haven't done in a very long time, because you're rediscovering the joy of writing itself, and whether or not this finished thing is going to be any good or not, at least it's given me a kind of an excitement, which I haven't had for a long time.
Oh, I think that's brilliant. I think that the experience of writing the two books is what enables you to do that.
Right.
Because I think you get to a stage where you've got the experience, and obviously you've got all the screenwriting, you've got the knowledge, you have the ability. And it's allowing yourself to actually make that move, to move away.
It is, and I think that a lot of it's about, that's why meditation is super important to me. And I meditate a lot. And when I wrote The Silent Patient, I promised myself that I would meditate every single day before I wrote a word. And I kept that up for The Maidens too, because I get a lot of negative self-critical thoughts, and they can be really overwhelming. And if you meditate, you can somehow dive underneath the thoughts, or at least move them to one side and park them, So I still, every time I write something, I'm still at the back of my voice hearing a voice saying, this is crap, this is crap, this is crap. But before, it used to just make me just freeze and want to cry. And now I'm just able to kind of go, okay, hearing these voices, this is crap, and you keep going.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it is about that, is about managing this endless nightmarish voice in your head, which I think every writer has.
Yeah. Yeah. You can't tell. You can never tell with your own work. You can't tell whether it's any good or not. I don't think. I send stuff to Simon and he reads it and he goes, oh, this is great. And I'm like, oh, well, is it? Is it not?
Well,
so
they always say that, but yeah.
Well, no, exactly. At least you're honest. But I think that honesty is so important, and that's something
you're not afraid of him by the sounds of it, and I think a lot of it comes down to that, is just not fearing the criticism.
Yeah.
No.
And I think that's why your editors are so supportive too, and that's why it's so wonderful to have them in your life, because if you feel that you can send something out early and say, look, I don't think this is anything, but you tell me what you think, then they're going to give you that support.
Well, I think I'm still a bit scarred from the years of screenwriting, and that does,
right.
So I feel I feel like in my head I have to get from a place of emotional and creative poverty to a place of plenty now, where I feel like, okay, it's not all going to go horribly wrong if I give a bad draft to an agent or to an editor. They're not suddenly going to drop me and never want to speak to me again.
Yeah.
But that kept happening with screenplays, so that's why I feel a bit like nervous. But that will get easier, I hope, with time.
I mean, I think the difference is, you're an established novelist, that, the difference, even you can be a really successful screenwriter and you can still write a screenplay and it can go into development hell and never get made. But at least with a book, unless something goes terribly wrong, you know when you start writing act one or scene one, chapter one, that it's going to end up as a book, doesn't it? Because people are part of the process. But screenwriting, it's
true. And also with novels, you're remembered, I think, more for your successes than your failures.
Yes.
And so nobody says, oh, this is so and so who wrote that terrible third novel. They say this is so and so who wrote that first hit. Whereas I have many friends who are quite famous actors, and they often say to me that in Hollywood you're only remembered for your last project, and that's why it's so brutal. Because nobody really remembers the great film you made 20 years ago. They remember the stinker that you made last year.
Yeah.
So it's different with novels. I think it's more forgiving.
Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah, it's a better place to be, better world to be in, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
You're in the right place.
Definitely smarter and kinder, I would say. Yeah.
Agents
accepted, of course.
Yeah.
So I know we're running out of time rapidly, but I'm interested. Obviously, you've been published in many languages. I imagine the majority of which you don't speak yourself, but I'm guessing you speak Greek. Just a hunch.
Yeah.
Did you have a special relationship with the Greek translator for the book, or was that just the same as any other?
No, I met her when I went to Athens for the launch of it. Did I? No, I had it. It was lovely to go to Athens. It was lovely to be welcomed in the way that they did. They've taken it. I'm Cypriot, half English.
Yeah.
Generally Athenians or Greeks are very quick to point out the similarities between the two the differences between the two countries. They're not, and yet a bit like the English and Andy Murray, they sort of adopted me as one of their own, which was a very nice feeling. To be so popular in Athens was lovely. Yeah. But I've met many of the translators, and they've often been really fascinating people in their own right. So it's been really a lovely experience. And the nicest thing has been the publishers, the editors. So I've got several new, deeply great friends from around the world. My Spanish publisher, my French publisher, I can go on, my American publishers particularly. And we're friends now, which is great. So we see each other, we go out for a drink and a meal, and we catch up and we email each other. And so my world has expanded in a really lovely way. Yeah.
But it's always odd, isn't it, that people in Spain or France, or whatever, are experiencing your novel, but through the prism of a translator's own voice. Yeah,
and you have to trust that. Funny you say that, because I had that conversation last week in Spain, and my Spanish editor quickly hastened to say, "Oh no, but we're very, very, we make sure that everything is exactly as you wrote it. We don't can only, leaps of fantasy." But you have to trust people, I guess. It would be. I wanted to try for many years to learn to speak French and failed, and had many lessons and failed. And I thought, well, I know the Silent Patient novel backwards off by heart. Sit down with the novel in French, and I'm going to read it, understand it, and teach myself. And I couldn't even read a page. I was like, no idea what's going on.
Oh dear, that's hilarious. Oh, it's great. And you think that's the thing about language. I always think if you've got 2 languages, then it should be relatively easy to learn a third. But I think it depends where the root, doesn't it? The root of the language is important.
Yeah, I can only speak Greek because we grew up with hearing it and my grandparents and stuff. But I'm so bad at languages. I've tried to learn Spanish too and can't. And so I think it's part of the brain that I don't have.
So you either can or you can't. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, my kids have be brought up learning Irish, and one of them is a scientist and they've been learning Irish since they were dots, and being scientists, languages just aren't the thing at all. Hopeless.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Saying that, but
there's a question from Dee here about what other creative outlets do you have? I mean, you're not writing screenplays anymore. You're writing novels, but do you do other things as well? Do you paint, or do you do anything like that?
I used to paint a lot in oils, and I've been thinking about that a lot. I really want to get back to it. I think the problem with my problem is, or maybe all writers are like that. I don't talk to that many writers, so I don't know. But I'm a complete workaholic, and that's where I have to try and get more of a balance now and get some hobbies again.
Yeah.
I tend to
get a life.
I've done is obsessed with the first novel, The Silent Patient, obsessed on it for years. And then The Maidens, because it was a 2-book deal, I thought, okay, well, when I get to finish The Maidens, then I'm going to relax. So I've obsessed about The Maidens non-stop now for 3 years. And now I've promised myself that I can't continue to live like that. I can't live to write. I have to stop and pull back and just try and start painting again. Even just something as simple as that would be fun.
Wow.
So I hope to. We'll see. Yeah. Don't know whether you can change or not, or whether you just keep on. Noel Coward said that work is more fun than fun, and there is an element of that.
I think this is the problem when you're a writer. If you wrote because you loved it, because it was a hobby to start with, and then it becomes your job, it's still sort of your hobby. So people say to you, what do you do to relax? And you write to relax because that's the thing you love to do. So it's.
I was talking to a journalist in America, and she said to me that actually it's the same for a reader, which made me really happy, because I said clearly there's something wrong with my brain, because I'm not happy walking along the street unless I'm thinking partly about these fictional characters in my head. And she said, but it's the same for a reader, that she's not happy unless she's thinking about a book that she's reading while she's walking along the street. So there's something about this other reality we carry around in our heads the whole time.
You can't get away from it. Oh, it's amazing. No, very, very, it's so interesting. If you ever do a creative writing workshop, Alex, sign me up. You're number one person.
Don't know about that, but
for sure. So I'm just flipping through here to see if we've missed any questions. Lots of people loving Agatha Christie, lots of people loving The Silent Patient, and definitely I think they're going to be moving on to The Maidens. I highly recommend it, guys. Absolutely read, especially having listened now to Alex. Definitely go out there and get that book. And it's really interesting from a voice point of view as well. I think I love the way you've managed to get inside Mariana's head, and for a guy writing a woman, you've captured her, and you've captured her sense of loss and the grief, and really, really brilliantly.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'm just going through. I think we've got everything. Lots of people saying golden nuggets there. There are so many little moments in here that are just wonderful. Things I'm going to take away now and use.
Don't waste your time on drafts. That's a joyful thing.
Exactly. Yeah, that outline process is really interesting.
Yeah, I really feel very grateful for that teacher. He taught me so much, and he learned so much from Disney. I think they're the best place to learn how to write really well. I think screenplays and stuff. So. Yeah,
no, definitely. They're definitely doing something right in Disney, aren't they? Let's face it. So that has been absolutely amazing. We have hit the hour, and we didn't lose the internet, which is even better. So I know Simon was worrying about feeling like being stuck in the corner there, but it's been fantastic.
No, it's been fantastic.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
So interesting.
Thank you very much for your time.
Absolutely. Absolutely, it's been brilliant. So guys, go out now and order The Maidens. The link is in the comments, and make sure you pick that up, and look out for Alex. He'll be popping up all over the place, I'm sure, doing PR all around the world. Yeah, definitely. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to stop the broadcast now and say goodbye to everybody, but if you want to hang on for 1 second, we won't boot you out just yet. So thank you. Everybody else is saying they want to do your workshop too, so I think you've got a ready-made audience here. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.